I'm going to be honest with you for a second. I don't really think people know what a Mari Sue even is. You know it's synonymous with bad writing, cheesy wish fulfillment, and all of that, but what actually is a Mari Sue? For a lot of people, it's something you just intrinsically know, right? You recognize it when you see it. But is that really recognizing what a Mari Sue is, or is that kind of a confirmation bias that you might have? This thing I don't like it because it's a Mari Sue, right? That's an easy explanation. It's an easy justification for not liking something. You may think I'm exaggerating, but the term has been absolutely mangled by online criticism. Misshapen and stretched so thin that it's become like a stretched out sock, like a sock trying to fit over a head. It's an easy buzzword. Whatever it was, it's gone. So what is a Mari Sue really? How is the term used in critical online spaces today? And are these characters really Mari Sues? Or are they something else? That's what I hope to answer here with this video. So let's start off with the definition. I know, boring, but bear with me in this one. If we're going to technically discuss a Mari Sue, we need a working definition, right? And what better place than TV tropes? TV tropes has spent the better part of 20 years cataloging all of the key tropes and cliches and stereotypes of fiction. So if we go to TV Tropes' website, we find the definition of a Mari Sue, which is they got nothing. They don't know what it is. They have no working definition of a Mari Sue. So even the people who obsessively catalog fiction cannot define a Mari Sue. Okay, that makes this a little more tricky, but we can work with this. Granted, it may not be a single definition, but we have some key elements. What we can know for sure is that the term Mari Sue dates back to a 1974 Star Trek fanfiction called A Trekkie's Tale, which itself was a parody of the increasingly prevalent self-insert fanfiction model.
Gee golly gosh glorioski, thought Mari Sue as she stepped on the bridge of the Enterprise. Here I am, the youngest lieutenant in the fleet, only 15 and a half years old. Captain Kirk came up to her. Oh, Lieutenant, I love you madly. Will you come to bed with me? Captain, I am not that kind of girl.
It criticized how so many fanfictions at the time featured a character who was either unusually talented or skilled, fell in love with either Kirk or Spock, was a half-human, someone's sister, and would usually die in a blaze of glory and be mourned by everyone despite them knowing her for like maybe a day or a week or so. What A Trekkie's Tale did was mix all these disparate, separate ideas and amp them up to 11, for the sake of parody, of course. Obviously, this wasn't the first Mari Sue. Pollyanna, the classic literature character immortalized by Disney, is very Sue-ish with her inherent goodness, being beloved by all, and her only fault being that she's just too good for this sinful earth. As outlined in Pat Flieger's presentation at the American Culture Association conference on March 31st, 1999, titled Too Good to Be True, 150 Years of Mari Sue, a lot of 19th century children's magazines contained subscriber-submitted stories that featured Mari Sue-ish characters.
19th century versions appear in the pages of Robert Murray's Museum. Founded in 1841 by Samuel Goodrich, by the time the magazine was absorbed by the Youth's Companion in 1872, it had featured works by every major 19th century American writer for children, from Goodrich to Alcott, Jacob Abbott, Mary Mapes Dodge, and Sophie May. It also published works by lesser literary lights, most notably the subscribers themselves, who made the magazine their own from 1857 to 1868. While boys tended to write nonfiction articles, girls most often wrote stories and poems, some about wonderful girls whose accomplishments and charms are tangibly appreciated by those around them. Emily Martin, who in 1862 saves a sleeping Indian chief from certain death by bear. Maya, whose gentleness and kindness are extolled by animals and elves in 1858. Unella, a white child raised by Native Americans in 1865, so lovable that she holds the entire village in a gentle thraldom. Even little Ellen, who dies beautifully of her mother's thoughtfulness in 1849, all have elements we associate with Mari Sue.
So in other words, the Mari Sue is older than the Civil War. Okay, great, fantastic, great. Glad that every working definition that we had previously is just toss it out the window, no longer relevant. Okay, let's work with this. As time went on and the internet happened, the term Mari Sue spread outside of the Star Trek fandom and into everywhere, mainstream fandom discourse. And immediately, no one could agree on what it meant. Because what was before a Mari Sue, a specific reference to a specific type of character in Star Trek, it became more vague. Was the competency the key part of being a Mary Sue, or just the personality? Was it the way people reacted to the Sue, or the power they possessed? Do Sues even need to be an author avatar? This became very complicated, especially in certain spaces where we started seeing different tropes and versions and iterations of the Mary Sue. In fact, I think OSP, Overly Sarcastic Productions, even has their interpretation of what a Mary Sue is, which I think is very interesting.
The story still only exists to serve the image of the character. No matter the skin, the Mary Sue makes the story boring around them. A story with a Sue at its core is written as though the Sue is the center of the universe. We're supposed to accept at face value that they're the most interesting, most important character in the story, because that's the starting point of their character. Not their backstory, not their motivation, just how invested we're supposed to be. And I think fundamentally that's what makes a Sue a Sue.
We're not going to necessarily work with that as the framework, but we may lift from it with our working definition that we're going to hope to form. What made it more interesting was how, at this point in time, we started to see tropes outside of Star Trek influence our perspective of the Sue. The Mary Sue stereotype of the 2000s was a cross between Sephiroth from Final Fantasy and Shadow the Hedgehog. These extremely distinct and unusual tropes and traits all mashed together. We got our angel wings, our giant swords, our battle scars from who knows where, our tragic, disturbing, dark backstory. For my money, there are three factors at play that, based on my readings, based on what I've seen, that I think really hammer home what a Mary Sue is. Struggle, likability, and plot derailment. Now, the struggle, I think, is most important. Power is power. Superman has incredible power, but he often struggles to address the conflicts in his story because often they can't be solved by just punching something really hard in the face. So all those powers might help Superman address the real conflict, but the powers do not remove the weight of the conflict.
I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, always taking constant care not to break something, to break someone.
Whereas someone like the Doctor from Doctor Who, he can walk up to an alien and tell him, "Oh, just look me up."
Is this world protected? And what you've got to ask is, what happened to them? Hello, I'm the Doctor.
And that deflates the tension right there, because he doesn't even have to do anything. He can co-spy on his reputation. That's maybe not power in the physical sense, but it's power that ruins the tension of a scene. The Doctor has no superpowers. He can regenerate, yes. He's immortal, yes. But that's not the same thing as jumping over a building in a single bound or having laser vision. He has a sonic screwdriver and he has two hearts. And somehow he can handle entire war zones and just take care of it on his own. Certain points during the Moffat seasons especially, it gets a little ridiculous what he can handle on his own without really worrying about it. I'd say that's more Mary Sue-ish than Superman having massive power, even though you'd never typically associate the Doctor with the Mary Sue trope, because he's essentially just a really smart guy walking into a space without any power.
Know what to do because I'm clever!
The issue isn't the matter of power level, it's not power scaling we're talking about here. It's what that power can do in order to deflate, not confront, but deflate a conflict. Struggle can also be sometimes hard to quantify. A character like Light Yagami is in many ways a power fantasy. Any name he writes in his death note dies. But the catch is, L is his perfect counter. Someone who exploits Light's pride and eagerness to prove himself, to get Light to expose himself. Light starts off with one of the biggest advantages he ever could have, but because L lures him into killing someone on live television, broadcast in his local area, something that only he would see. Light gives L a massive advantage. Light may be incredibly skilled and clever, but his pride ultimately leads him to making mistakes. Light and L are the only people who can make the others struggle. And that's interesting, because despite the power, it does not deflate the conflict. Meanwhile, with a Mary Sue,
that meteor is heading straight to the edge of the world! We're all gonna die! Run for your lives! It's the end of humanity as we can possibly stop it! What? Did her sneeze just... Oh, I hate allergy season.
Then there's likability. A character being likable is not inherently a Mary Sue trait. A lot of characters are likable. Some people are just charismatic in real life. But the trait that is Mary Sue-ish is when a character's charms affect people with minimal effort, who frankly should not be charmed.
Mr. Spock came onto the bridge. What are you doing in the command seat, Lieutenant? The captain told me to. Flawlessly logical. I admire your mind.
And usually this is a universal trait. Everyone's charmed, everyone's affected by them, etc. They don't have to work, they don't have to have common experiences, no one gets on the wrong foot with them. Everyone's kind of like immediately, I love this person, they are fantastic. But that isn't inherently a Mari Sue trait itself either. How it all comes down is how this charm influences the conflict of a story. The Pride and Prejudice started with Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy just immediately charming each other and falling in love without any conflict. It kind of makes the book kind of meandering at that point, because, oh, there's no issue here. There has to be some tension, some idea of them not seeing eye to eye. Perhaps we need a different example. Fruits Basket is one of the top-selling shoujo manga of all time, and its title character, Toru, is incredibly likable. The whole cast of characters falls in love with her immediately, and sometimes they immediately fall in love with her, if you get the drift. She's very charming, she's kind, she's always listens to others' pain and stories, yet we later find out that her charming front is a front. It's all a means to avoid showing the immense sadness she feels about the loss of her mother, her feelings of isolation, etc.
Toru, while on the exterior, looks like she has no troubles. The reality is that she's struggling with losing her mother. Toru at this moment has no reason to live because the reason she lived prior to this, her mother, died in a tragic accident. So now she struggles to find her own place, her own reason to live again. And while she is in a dark moment in her life, she is not giving up hope that one day she will find another reason to live.
But her kindness does come from a place of genuine kindness. She wants to do good so that the world doesn't hurt, because she cares deeply for others. And the core conflict of the series is healing the hearts of those who are suffering from pain. The Soma family is cursed. They transform if they're hugged by members of the opposite sex into one of the 12 animals of the Chinese zodiac plus the cat. And Toru wants to help these people go through their pain, from abuse to isolation to stigma. Even in this world of romance, however, Toru's charms aren't enough, because even though Fruits Basket is a shoujo manga with a focus on romance, the characters are all dealing with their deeply seated internal conflicts. And this prevents them from being romantic, because they gotta fix themselves before they can fix anyone else. Also, the characters can't hug, because they're cursed to turn into animals when hugged. So that puts a damper on the whole romance thing. So while she is charming, that's still not enough to solve Fruits Basket's core conflict. Some have called Toru a Mari Sue because of how charming and lovely she is, but in actuality, these charms do nothing to deflate the tension of the narrative. That leads us to the third factor: plot derailment. What does it mean to derail a plot? Well, it means a lot. What a Mari Sue does ultimately is resolve conflict unnaturally fast. If there's a big storm of death coming by and a character just stops the storm by, I don't know, farting in its general direction, there's no real plot there, is there? The storm's done. Minimal effort was done on the protagonist's part, and now the storm that was a big threat is now just gone. So how do we fill the rest of the pages here? Where does the plot go after the main threat has been deflated? Well, the Mari Sue is that force of deflation. It is the antithesis of a strong story because it removes the driving conflict from the narrative, and that's the key thing. I want to tell you, though, what plot derailment isn't, when the plot naturally shifts gears. For example, the movie Psycho. It starts with Marion Crane stealing a lot of money, then going on the run. It looks at first like a roadside thriller, a road trip story where she's on the run from the law, but then she stops at the Bates Motel and is promptly murdered. The murder is not motivated over the money, has nothing to do with what happened previously. Marion just walks into a location and stumbles on some other matter entirely, and she's killed for reasons completely detached from what came before. And the whole plot now shifts. Now it's a murder mystery. Who killed her? Why? These structures exist, and they do derail the plot, but really it's all part of a structure. Derailment is when the plot shifts gears in a way that seems unnecessary or unfocused. Where you can tell the writers are now thinking, well, okay, now what do I write about? It's not power, it's not charms, it's none of the traits we discussed on their own. It's purely how these interplay to derail the tension of a narrative. This is one of the reasons why, say, Sailor Moon or Steven Universe don't really fit the whole idea of a Mari Sue. Both feature incredibly charming protagonists who have immense power, but the core conflict is never, can Sailor Moon blow up the enemy? I mean, the manga kind of does that, but the 90s anime not so much. She's a healer, ultimately. And so, yeah, she can blow up a planet, but blowing up a planet doesn't heal hearts. In that sense, the characters have to approach problems through a different lens. Yes, Sailor Moon is charming. Yes, she's powerful. But these don't derail the plot. Rather, they move the plot in a direction where she has to find new ways to resolve conflicts, usually by reaching out to someone emotionally. Then, there's Steven Universe. Steven has all the powers of his mother, Rose Quartz, later revealed to be Pink Diamond, one of the greatest, most powerful entities in the universe. He's inherited both her great power, but also the weight of responsibility that she once bared. And he constantly questions if the reason people care about him is because he's Rose Quartz's son, or Pink Diamond's son. He even questions his own existence, because Pink Diamond, the way crystal gems work in Steven Universe is strange. They can't really reproduce, but they can change form. And some of the crystal gems for a while suspect that Steven wasn't so much Rose Quartz's offspring, but rather Rose Quartz in a different form, because Rose Quartz died giving birth to Steven. Her gem became part of his flesh, embedded in his stomach. In the final conflict of the series, the main series, not future, Steven's gem is ripped out of him, and while some expect maybe Rose Quartz to rematerialize, instead we see an avatar of Steven, a second Steven, materialize, showing that Steven was always Steven and that there's no trace of his mother in there.
Where is Pink?
She's gone.
What did you say?
That his mother's gone and that Steven is his own unique individual. And this moment's cathartic, it's beautiful, and it resolves the actual conflict of the series, which doesn't really have any really connection to Steven being all-powerful. Ultimately, the plots and conflicts are not immediately derailed because the characters are powerful or charming. Rather, the characters are put to the test by the conflict, with their powers, with their charms. The TLDR version of what I just said is this. The Mari Sue is a character who is strong enough to subvert conflict, charming enough to avoid conflict, and derails the narrative in a way that makes you go, okay, what now? And that could be from an author avatar, it could be from just a badly written character. But the specific interplay of conflict-breaking power, of conflict-breaking charm, and plot derailment, those three elements combined, that is what a Mari Sue does. Maybe it's not what it is, but it's how it impacts everything. But what about the other components, the power fantasy elements, the self-insert? Well, I don't think those are necessarily all that important. Because you can have self-insert, you can have a power fantasy, and the story still works. The problem is when all of these elements that I've discussed are connected. It's the interplay of the three that makes something a Mari Sue. Someone being the author avatar, okay, whatever, that's not important. Someone being all-powerful, being a power fantasy, okay, whatever, that's not important. It's how these separate elements all interconnect that creates the Mari Sue. For an example of a character who is an author avatar, who is not a Mari Sue, look no further than Stephen King. Stephen King's protagonists draw heavily from his life. Many of them are writers. Many of them are individuals who struggle with substance abuse, like alcoholism. But no one is calling Jack Torrance, who Stephen King admits is an author avatar in some way, a Mari Sue, right? I mean, I hope not anyway. Goku is immensely powerful, but is he a Mari Sue? Well, no, I'd hope not. The problem is ultimately that the Mari Sues are not necessarily about avatarness or power, but how that impacts the narrative. They're how much they conflict and clash with the regular flow of storytelling. Does the audience buy that the character can naturally exist in this world? I mean, can you believe that John Wick or Rambo naturally exists in their world when they're basically walking gods? They're more skilled than 95% of everyone else. Oh, you can just believe that. Oh, well, why is that? Why is then Rey Skywalker from Star Wars so unbelievable to you if you can believe in John Rambo and John Wick in their specific narrative? No one calls John Wick a Mary Sue. But Rey's obviously Mary Sue, according to all these other people. Now, that's, of course, here's the other element, too. John Wick is obviously trained. John Wick, you can see the work that he's put into developing his skills in his actions, the mechanical movements, the very focused, direct things he does. Whereas Rey, not trained. That mechanical movement, that focus is not demonstrated within her actions in the film itself. But then again, no one really cares, because John Wick's an awesome movie. It's a great movie. The plot demands action, and John Wick delivers that action. The conventions of narrative allow us to kind of go, okay, we're going to see some action here, we're going to see some fighting, okay, whatever, let's keep going. But that's the kind of thing we're dealing with, right? You know, these characters get a total pass at being unrealistic, while others do not. Fantasies are appealing to audiences because they allow you to see things you wouldn't ordinarily see. The trick is if you buy into the fantasy it's selling you. Is the power fantasy something that you go into the movie or book or show wanting, or do you want to not see that power fantasy? Whereas Rey flails around with a lightsaber because she's untrained. So naturally, she's not going to demonstrate the same skill that John Wick displays in his technical fighting. But does this make for a bad narrative? How can Rey succeed if she's clearly unskilled with a lightsaber, if we never see her train? Now, that's all well and good unless, say, her main enemy was a character who also never finished his training and canonically is the weakest of the big bads that we see throughout the series. That would put things in perspective, wouldn't it?
You're afraid that you will never be as strong as Darth Vader.
Huh? Oh, yeah, it does a little, doesn't it? Even looking back at the first film, The Force Awakens, Rey wants to return home, but she needs to go on an adventure. She wants one thing, she needs the other. She wants to go home and find her parents, but she needs to escape her home and explore the galaxy. That's a basic character conflict right there. Not complex, not really distinct, but it's a basic one. It gets the job done. She ends up by going on that adventure and doing things. You know, in the final battle, she has no role in destroying Starkiller Base. That's entirely thanks to Finn's information and Poe Dameron's X-Wing fighting. She doesn't even save Han Solo. She doesn't even save Finn. So what does she really accomplish at the end of the movie? She manages to beat up a guy who himself never finished his training, who had a giant hole in his chest from a weapon that can project stormtroopers, plural, across a field. So yeah, it's a feat to win, but like, it's not like it's that big a feat. It's not like, say, she hopped into the cockpit of a ship she's never driven, fought in a war field that she's never engaged in, and at the age of, say, let's say 9, hypothetically speaking, destroys a battle station, thus turning around a massive war when that battle station controls ground troops. You see where I'm going with this, right?
I'm trying to. I don't know where the trigger is. Oops. Wrong one. Maybe it's this one. Nope. Wait, here it is.
Anakin Skywalker was also a Mary Sue. After all, he did manage to take down a droid command ship on his own when he was like 9, and the universe almost literally revolved around him. I mean, he had his own prophecy and everything. But here's the thing, Anakin still needed to be trained before he could use Force powers effectively. Think on that a moment. Anakin was pretty much a living avatar of the Force, and he still needed years of training to actually use the Force.
No, you dumbass. Him being in a pod race was him using his Force powers. A pod race was impossible for any other human being to do. That was the beyond Force power skill right there. That's what tipped off Qui-Gon. This guy is strong with the Force. Not just that he had access to the Force, not that he was Force sensitive, but Anakin was strong with the Force, clearly because he could pod race. And the Force worked through Anakin to maneuver a vehicle with superhuman speed. Do you think all Force powers is just, oh, the mind trick or whatever? No, it's the reactions. Knowing what to do at the right time. In the hierarchy of Star Wars protagonists, what Rey does is not only not extraordinary, it's actually kind of low level. But she's the Mary Sue and Anakin Skywalker isn't. When people criticize Rey for being a Mary Sue, they often point to one scene in The Force Awakens, specifically the scene where Rey pilots and fixes the Millennium Falcon. For one, she doesn't really pilot it all that well. Keep in mind, the original series, Han Solo and Lando Calrissian are able to outrun and outmaneuver TIE fighters in bulk. Here, she struggles outmaneuvering 2 TIE fighters. Further, when Han Solo comes back and they have to fix the Millennium Falcon, all Rey does is remove a compressor. She bypasses it.
Let's go to one of the biggest grievances often referred to by the Star Wars faithful: Rey fixing the Millennium Falcon better than Han Solo, its former owner. The usual defense for this is that Rey is a scavenger and lives alone, and can therefore fix things like a trained mechanic. But we don't know this for sure, because again, this skill was never hinted at.
Now, this might seem impressive if you weren't paying attention, but we find out earlier in the movie that Rey was there when the compressor was installed.
Some moof milker put a compressor on the ignition line.
Unkar plucked it. I thought it was a mistake too. Puts too much stress on the hyperdrive.
What'd you do?
I bypassed the compressor.
She knows what it does, how it impacts the engine, based purely on understanding how mechanics works. Now, this is demonstrated through dialogue, yes, but the dialogue tells us a lot. So, she removes a compressor and she kind of struggles to pilot a big ship. And that's so remarkable. That's something that's unusual that we haven't seen before in Star Wars. That a character living around machines figured out how a machine she had known about for years worked. Is that really so impressive? Hell, Han Solo isn't even that good at fixing the Falcon. Am I the only one who remembers Empire Strikes Back? How often Han Solo tries to fix the Falcon and just screws it up more? There's like 3 or 4 scenes where he fails to fix the Falcon. She'd probably be better at fixing a machine because she's been around machines. Now, is this information clearly communicated to the audience? Probably not. It could be done better, undeniably so. There could be more scenes elaborating on her mechanical know-how, scenes where she identifies mechanical pieces more, or something. It could be better. But is it bad as it is? I don't necessarily think it is. Her times on Jakku don't necessarily give us a full picture of her skill set, but it does illustrate that she knows enough to justify her skills in the movie. It certainly does not make her a Mari Sue in any case. One of the reasons why the Rey discourse is in particular so strange is that she's honestly less skilled than the majority of characters in Star Wars. She has no formal training, yes, but her main opponent is canonically weaker than prior villains, and also never finished his training. She only beats Palpatine because she turns Palpatine's power against him, something we had already seen done in previous Star Wars films by Mace Windu. Rey isn't that overpowered. She's not overpowered at all. She's just a big fish in a shrinking pond. I think it's worth pointing out also that the Rey is a Mari Sue accusations, they started with a tweet by Max Landis. Yeah, that Max Landis, son of the director John Landis. When The Force Awakens came out, he went to Twitter to call Rey the worst Star Wars character ever made. He used a few different words in that, but I'm simplifying it now. And at the time, he was called out by general audiences for sexism, because, yeah, that's what he was doing. Now, increasingly, online critics focus on fantasy and sci-fi stories, especially superhero stories, in order to go,
Mari Sue's gotten even worse. There's been a growing trend where no woman could be saved by a man in modern movies or TV shows. They're always hyper-competent, and no matter what they do, or how evil they are, they can and will be redeemed. Or at the very least, be the second most evil in comparison to someone else.
It's a convention of the genre. People have powers, Fantasy characters, they can use a sword. Sci-fi gunslingers can use guns. If you're a cyberpunk hacker, you can hack into a computer system. These are conventions, you gotta get used to it. I guess I gotta talk about professional Cinebear simp, Just a Robot now, don't I? He has a lot of videos on Mari Sue's, and I guess it reflects the general trends I've seen in certain spaces about discussion with Mari Sue's. Though when watching his video, despite Just a Robot having a playlist of 8 videos on Mari Sue's, with a couple of them being unlisted that were not in the playlist, that were then stitched to the end of videos he would later upload, which I think is interesting, to expand the runtime, to play the YouTube algorithm. He would just Frankenstein Mari Sue videos together.
Anyways, stay tuned till after the credits for some bonus content about how to do Mari Sue's the right way, and if Bella Swan from Twilight is or isn't a Mari Sue. Guys, those videos cost a lot of money to make. I will keep on listing them and upload a new Mari Sue video with them in it until I break even.
This playlist has a collective of over 1 million views.
Let's start with She-Hulk.
He has a lot of criticism about She-Hulk being a Mari Sue. So, She-Hulk's got super strength. That's something we've never seen before in a superhero story. Super strength. Can you imagine that? Really strong? Yeah, never seen that before in Marvel, especially. I mean, yeah, there's a couple exceptions to that. I mean, there's Hulk, there's Thor, Captain Marvel, Captain America, The Thing, Spider-Man, Venom, Carnage, Iron Man, the Green Goblin, Red Hulk, Abomination, Thanos, Drax Destroyer, Valkyrie, Ant-Man, Adam Warlock, Groot, Ultron, Surtur, Odin, Hercules, Zeus, Jane Foster's Thor, Black Panther, Shuri Black Panther, Ego, The Living Planet, Dormammu, Ronan the Accuser, Namor, Werewolf by Night, Man-Thing. I can keep going. Oh, but she breaks the fourth wall to rewrite reality in a joke scene to satisfy her character arc, which is very interesting.
That's right. When she doesn't like the lemons she's been given, she just breaks the fourth wall and just changes everything to suit her needs. So as powerful as Wanda is, someone who took out an alternate version of Captain Marvel and a ton of other powerful superheroes, She-Hulk is still leaps and bounds above her when it comes to power, because she can literally rewrite reality.
And that's never happened before either. No Marvel character has ever rewritten reality. Except, when Doctor Strange did it at the end of his movie with the Time Stone, or when Scarlet Witch did it in WandaVision to bring, Vision back to life, or when Thanos, Hulk, and Tony did it with the Infinity Stone, or when Doctor Strange did it twice in Spider-Man No Way Home, or when Loki did it repeatedly in Loki, right down to rewriting the entire multiverse, or the TVA for that matter, every time they pruned a universe, or when Deadpool and Wolverine did it by saving a universe without its anchor being. But no, She-Hulk argued with the writers to change the plot. That's so much more extreme than rewriting the multiverse itself. Seriously, what's there about She-Hulk that's particularly unique anyway, power-wise? She's really strong, and that's about it. Oh, but she can control her anger. That very thing that fuels the Hulk, that makes him the strongest there is, she can control the anger, and thus not build strength up like the Hulk can. That seems like the opposite of being powerful, but okay, sure, makes him more powerful apparently. Now, I firmly believe that discussing She-Hulk's powers in relation to the She-Hulk series is a reductive conversation, because She-Hulk's powers don't really help her all that much. If anything, they create problems. Jennifer's whole conflict is how she's perceived, either as an object of desire or as someone who is demeaned for trying to advance in the world. Even when seen as a sexually desirable person, like as She-Hulk, her dual identity causes her a problem. People want her for her green transformation, her massive biceps. Not for her as a person, however. Not for her as Jennifer. For her as She-Hulk. And that conflict, the perceived self versus the true self, is what the finale of the She-Hulk series is all about. The conflict with Kevin isn't about stopping Intelligentsia, the big bad organization, who themselves don't really matter either. It's about taking life back on her own terms. It's about taking control of a narrative that's spun out of control. And that's very important, to become self-actualized. It's also a meta joke criticizing the MCU and their formulaic storytelling, something Deadpool and Wolverine also does in the movie Deadpool and Wolverine. That movie is a celebration of both the value of the outsider, who isn't the hero, while also celebrating years of a cinematic universe. Both movies are about perception, and both movies are meta-commentaries on the films that came before, and the structures therein. I want to elaborate slightly more on the finale of She-Hulk, because the entire finale happens because her public image is damaged by her taking the bait Intelligentsia plans for her, hitting her where she's emotionally vulnerable, and her publicly losing her temper. The very thing she said she and other women had to control in that first episode.
Well, here's the thing, Bruce. I'm great at controlling my anger. I do it all the time. Because if I don't, I will get called emotional or difficult, or I might just literally get murdered.
The bit that everyone complained about, because they were like, oh, I don't get why she would say that. Why would she need to control her anger more? Well, that's why. That's the reason why, because one outburst is enough to ruin a person's entire persona, and, she loses her job, she's treated like a monster. I mean, think about it this way. The Hulk had to destroy a city before people started to treat him like a monster after New York. But after one small outburst after being violated publicly, that's enough for her to be demeaned by the public. That's kind of the point of the whole show. But I think people missed the idea. They missed the forest for the trees here.
That's right. When she doesn't like the lemons she's been given, she just breaks the fourth wall.
It's almost like every comment that people got mad about was actually tied in thematically with the ideas of the show or something, or the core conflict of everything. That would be crazy, right? The entire finale isn't about punching a bad guy. It's about reclaiming her identity and claiming ownership of a narrative that's spun out of her control.
Well, can we not do Todd gets Hulk powers? Like, the powers aren't the villain. He is. And Bruce swooping down from literal outer space to save the day in my story.
Well, let's take a look at this. There is a character who isn't overpowered by the rules of her universe, doesn't resolve all the conflicts with her powers, and in fact, her powers create more problems, and certainly is not liked by everyone, considering how public image is the key conflict that she faces in the show. So how is She-Hulk remotely a Mari Sue? And I can apply this same discussion to many characters who critics call Mari Sues, and I will, right now.
We have Wendy from Peter Pan and Wendy, or just Wendy as I like to call it. But someone at the writing department, who probably spends more time on fanfiction.net than doing their actual job, said to themselves, I can fix her by making her into a badass sword fighter and have her say the line, this power belongs to no boy! She breaks a mirror as she sword fights with her brothers, then shifts the blame onto them when her parents ask her about it. Finally, I just got done reviewing all of the Witcher Blood Origins. It's the worst thing I have ever reviewed yet. Our main character, the Lark, is a badass woman who will save the Waldo. Her and the other guy get locked up, but she's too cool for the rules and Locke picks her way out.
So wait, she gets locked up and Locke picks her way out, which is a thing that just about every single fantasy and protagonist has done. Lockpicking, that apparently is too extreme for this.
Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
Look, this can go on forever. I could go on forever about this and just go through each character people call Mari Sue and say this is why they're wrong. For the most part, they might hit a real Mari Sue once or twice. I think the bigger problem is why we keep calling all these characters, who are, I think, very obviously all female, Mari Sues. Like, why do we keep saying this? It's because we recognize a Mari Sue and we go, oh, there's a Mari Sue. But we see that pattern recognition in our brains, I guess, and just act? Or what's the pattern that we're noticing? Why are we calling all these characters Mari Sues when so many of them clearly aren't? Based on my scientific observation, I've determined that these are the traits that many online critics seem to conflate with Mari Sueism. Power of any kind that is unearned qualifies as being a Mari Sue trait, apparently. But what does unearned mean?
Anyways, because of her play fighting with her brothers, she's able to take up martial arts and become a competent fighter. Lol, I'm just messing with you. She doesn't do any formal training. But those play fights with her siblings somehow give her the skills to take on battle-hardened pirates that are 2 times bigger than her.
Well, I guess they want a shonen training montage with every single character to have them start at level 1 before rising up the ranks, and that works for some characters, certainly. I mean, I don't think Iron Man would make sense if Iron Man just started off with the Iron Man suit. We have to see him build it, have to see him advance technology. Spider-Man, though, he's just given power. He gets bitten by a spider. He goes from like a weakling to a really strong, one of the strongest heroes right there. That's not really earned, that's given. The mutants, they're all born with their powers. That's given to them, not really earned. Controlling and honing their powers, yes, that is earned. But they don't have to train to get powerful. And Rey uses Force abilities because she's born Force sensitive. She's born as a dyad in the Force. Her powers are granted to her by the essence of the universe. So it's hard to really say she's worked for her powers any more than Anakin did when he was born with the Force. Well, okay, but there is one example with Rey, where she uses the Jedi mind control trick, where she tells a guard to loosen her binds without any training to know how to do that. She's basing it probably off of legends she heard or stories she's heard. Okay, that's unearned. I'll grant you that. It's also one scene. The scene in question also doesn't end or resolve any conflicts. It just allows the plot to move forward. It's a plot device, nothing more. There are way more egregious cases where characters have very unearned power that allows them to resolve conflicts that are key to the plot. A great example of this? Harry Potter. All the tools Harry uses to beat Voldemort in each of the books is handed to him. He beats Voldemort as a kid and multiple times afterwards because of things outside his influence. His parents died to save him, so he's protected by a magic field that repels Voldemort, the magic of love and all that. Now that's something that doesn't work with any other character whose parents died or whose loved ones died protecting them. It's just unique to Harry, apparently. Later on, Voldemort resurrects himself, using Harry's blood, meaning that barrier over love is gone.
I can touch you.
I would really not be screaming that at the top of your lungs.
But oh no, now it turns out that Voldemort and Harry had the same magic core in their wands, a phoenix feather, and they just happen to be the only two people who have this exact same feather because Dumbledore's phoenix is the donor of the wand's cores, apparently. Okay, whatever. So whenever Harry and Voldemort attack, their wands just counter each other out, so Voldemort and Harry can't fight each other straight up. Now it turns out that Harry has to die by Voldemort's hands in order to actually kill Voldemort for reals, because Harry is the 8th Horcrux and Voldemort has acquired the Elder Wand from Dumbledore's corpse. Okay. And when this happens, Voldemort uses a killing curse for a second time against Harry, and he's fine. He's the only person in the recorded history, apparently, to survive the killing curse twice, and he's just okay. He gets better, And when the book ends, Harry wins because of wand technicalities. It's legalese, but for wands, where apparently Voldemort didn't really own his wand that he stole from Dumbledore, but really Harry owned it, and the wand can't hurt Harry because of very complicated circumstances. It's a whole thing. So at no point in any of Harry's direct confrontations with Voldemort does he ever actually employ any of the skills he actually learned. It's always been some outer plot device. And that's not even counting all the times Dumbledore swoops in to save Harry. All of this is entirely unearned. Despite the whole book focusing on training, none of the skills Harry uses to win derive from that training. And that's way more egregious than anything Rey does in the trilogy of Star Wars sequels. Yet no one calls Harry Potter a Mari Sue, but they call Rey a Mari Sue. Curious how that works out, huh? And despite the power being unearned, it does not dilute the tension of the plot, because the odds are always that much greater. Is unearned power even important as a metric of what qualifies good writing? I'd say no. It all depends on what the story is. Like, yeah, it'd be a bad D&D campaign if you start off at level 20 and didn't level up and build your character up, sure, but like, what if we're not playing D&D? Writing isn't like a video game where you can just level up characters. It's not like a lit RPGs, sure, that makes sense. Okay, you know what? Again, I'm getting off track here. The other Mari Sue trait I see a lot of the time that critics keep pointing out is that women experience things that women experience in fiction. And this is where things get really strange.
We have evil men like this Sith. We have female characters from the cartoons like Green Woman, Teen Femdalorian, and more. Girls shooting, doing cool things with lightsabers, and of course Ahsoka saying,
Anakin never got to finish my training. I walked away from him.
No!
The idea of the girl boss, it's a bit of a criticism today, sure. I mean, the girl boss is a very easy shorthand way for studios and writers to incorporate feminism in their narratives. Sure, I get that. The girl boss, it's a stereotype. It's usually a little superficial. Girl bosses don't often engage in the ideas of systemic oppression or anything like that. Usually, the girl boss is there to be cool because they're the boss and a girl. And it's like, we're doing things the guys can't do because we're girls and we're cool. Yeah, that can be a little stereotypical. It can be a little cringy at times, depending on how it's done. Yeah, of course it can, especially when it oversimplifies systemic problems. The problem here is that any instance of this discussion, any instance where a girl expresses dissatisfaction with the system as it is now deemed as the message, as they keep insisting it is.
This dark new fusion between two of media's deadliest diseases, the Mari Sue and social justice. Social justice is like a zombie plague. It makes everything worse. It's kind of like we were battling Nazis and now thanks to social justice, we're battling Nazi zombies. Or we made some friends with some cool people, but the social justice virus turned them into evil, soulless monsters that feed off happiness. Or you finally met that beautiful woman of your dreams and now social justice has changed her into a hideous abomination that feeds on the blood of men. And now it's infected the Mari Sue, which isn't just bad, it's a nightmare scenario.
And this message that they keep saying is just girls want to have equal rights. And it's, when you say it like that, it sounds way less threatening than the message they want to communicate. Yeah, girls want to do things guys do. That's it. It's not much to it. Whenever that's on screen, you get a wave of people making this big mountain out of a tiny molehill, especially when it's like a show aim for girls, like young girls, you know, like under the age of 10, like say Peter Pan and Wendy.
I can fix her by making her into a badass sword fighter and have her say the line, "This power belongs to no boy." She puts herself in comical, dangerous situations she doesn't have the training to handle, and is never saved once. In fact, she's the one to save Peter Pan. Somehow give her the skills to take on battle-hardened pirates that are 2 times—
Battle-hardened pirates, they fight kids. Captain Hook's big enemy is a child. Captain Hook is regularly subdued by a bunch of kids. We're not talking about, like, master swordsman here. We're talking about a guy who regularly loses to a boy. And it also doesn't help that, A, we rarely see this same complaint with Gary Stews. You don't see these same critics pointing out how men who assert their dominance as men are bad. They just do it when women do it.
But is every SJW hero a Mari Sue? Probably not. Some, I assume, are good characters. However, while the normal Mari Sue plays out power fantasies, like being smart and beautiful, the SJW Sue's fantasy is fulfilling all the author's social justice bias. All good men are gay or submissive. Straight white men are evil. Your chosen minority is the wisest, smartest, most misunderstood, and most productive people despite being savagely oppressed. America is portrayed as treating women and minorities like Jews in Nazi Germany. Anyone who holds opinions you don't agree with is a literal Nazi, and the universe of an SJW story bends to justify anything their character does.
The same critics who often will say a wisest girl doing his girl boss message moment seem to have very strong contempt towards women. And talk about women in ways that is extremely demeaning, insulting their appearance, insulting their wants and needs and their desires, and treating them like objects. And it's really, I'm just going to play a few clips because I don't think what I can say could do it justice. It's better if you just see what I mean.
Black Widow, aka Natasha Romanoff, while I wouldn't consider her a Mari Sue character, yet has much less of a character than she could have because social justice warriors won't allow her any weaknesses. The famous outrage brought on by the Age of Ultron movie that caused Joss Whedon to evacuate Twitter was sparked because Black Widow finally got a moment of vulnerability. Oh sure, we've seen her brood over her dark past before, but that was cool, edgy superhero stuff. Plus, all that mention of red she had in her ledger probably appealed to the cat lady crowd. Natasha revealed that she was made infertile to make her a better spy/assassin, since having a child would understandably compromise her willingness to kill. This is kind of like the female equivalent of castrating a man so he can concentrate on his job without the pesky lust kicking in, Unsullied style. They'd taken away a core element of her womanhood so she could be a tool for murder. And in her eyes, this made her a monster. And in response, feminists were like, hey, she should be out getting abortions and killing men, not having pesky humanity. I mean, we're doing just fine without it.
How did you misinterpret what people were upset about with that scene so badly? It has nothing to do with the fact that she had that removed. It had to do with how it was discussed. The big issue at play was not that it happened. The problem was that the way Joss Whedon wrote it was that she called herself a monster for having the procedure done. That because she had that surgery done to her, she was less human. That was the controversy. It had nothing to do with, like, you know, the idea that she was scarred for life and it was traumatizing. It had to do with the fact that she was calling herself inhuman and that no one corrected her in the story. Bruce Banner just hears that and goes, oh, I guess you're right. I guess you are inhuman. That's the vibe it gets. That's why people had an issue with it. You missed the mark so far in getting as to why people were pissed off about it that I have trouble believing you have any understanding of how to interpret media. The way every single example of a woman that you've had is fat, piercings, has glasses, and has dark hair as opposed to blonde hair. That tells me you're trying to demean them. Because you're using these as the way social justice ruined women, quote unquote. So your framing of this is fat shaming. It is making people act like tattoos and piercings are inherently bad. And you're saying that people with funny shirts are somehow not good enough for you. It's almost like you can't actually argue your way out of a paper bag and have to rely on these straw men to prop you up. Because, your audience are also fat-phobic, hate piercings, hate glasses, and dyed hair, apparently. And finally, one other Mari Sue thing is the copycat Sue, which is the most unimportant. I'm going to skip past it real quick, but basically a character who's basically just a copy of an established character. So think the type your name in the DeviantArt plus the Hedgehog, those kinds of characters. I'm sure that these copycat Sue critics would love Shao the Hedgehog, but I digress. Now, of the lists of traits that online critics often cite as traditionally Mari Sue traits, you might notice one missing. One that dates back to the original Mari Sue itself. Extreme beauty.
It's time the world knew. What's your bra size, Mari Sue? You know what? At this point, I'm not even surprised.
Mari Sues have always been extremely beautiful. Objects of desire, even established characters' desires. But no, these folks don't have a problem with that. They often argue that Mari Sues today are ugly and unattractive, and they'll imply that these are reflections of the creators of these Mari Sues, who they also say are ugly and unattractive.
You see this a lot in fan fiction, probably because the natural habitat of the Mari Sue is fan fiction. This likely stems from an author wanting to place themselves in the world of their favorite series, but not their real selves, with all the nasty human elements. Their ideal selves, the one with the great hair, the perfect looks, and the existent social skills.
But I think this is because they want beautiful characters like that. The desired beautiful Mari Sue, dainty and wanted, these critics want more of that. They even use AI to generate perfect versions of their female characters. Despite some obvious flaws, they don't care because it's the skin-deep beauty that they're seeking. Come to think of it, they actually hate when their heroes lose, almost as if they want every conflict easily solved by their male heroes. Look at the reaction the Superman trailer got for presenting Superman initially as defeated, as broken. Shadiversity had a whole video ranting about this. They want their male characters to be respected, desired. They want everyone, no matter what the male characters say, to respect them, much like the traditional Mari Sues, who could say anything they wanted and still be respected. They want Mari Sues, but on their terms. So all of their complaints seem trivial, maybe even hypocritical, because we know if the genders were reversed, they would be salivating over this. The impact of all this is much worse than you really realize, because it's not really about the critics anymore. It's not about the small online conversations we have. It's about how this discourse affects writers, especially young writers. I'm going to tell you something that every teenager who wanted to be a writer did in the mid-2000s. They'd come up with a brand new character. They'd be great, maybe too great. And they'd look up one of those old online quizzes and ask, does my character have too many Mari Sue traits? Is my character maybe a Mari Sue? Quizzes would ask, does your character have any unique birthmarks, special abilities, differently colored hair, something that makes them stand out? Do people love them? Do they have friends? And inevitably, each of these questions would be answered, and each of these quizzes would confirm the writer's fears for them. That yes, they had crafted a Mari Sue, the worst sin an author can possibly commit, right? I think the fear of creating a Mari Sue trapped a lot of young writers. They were so scared of doing something bad that they ended up doing nothing at all. Because not writing anything at all was preferable to accidentally creating a Mari Sue. And that's really depressing to me, actually. And what's even more depressing to me now is that we have this, the standard for being a Mari Sue is much lower than it was when I was a kid, And we have all these young writers who are bombarded with messages now. It's not like how when I was a kid where I could just turn off the internet and start writing. No, now we have it on our phones. We have it blasted all around us. You can have it in your ears as you put your phone and walk around everywhere. You can't escape the critical landscape, and thus you can't escape being told that Mary Sue's are bad, that if you do the things we've discussed previously in this video in your writing, that's bad. And I think it's going to discourage a lot of people from trying new things, from experimenting. And it's also going to be an easy dismissal of people's work that exists on the outside. It's no secret that a lot of the people who were writing Mary Sue's, they were trying to touch upon something that they were struggling with on the inside, want that power fantasy so they can feel strong. I see a lot of people who work out in gyms and stuff talk about how much they love stuff like Dragon Ball Z. A lot of athletes love shonen anime, I've noticed. It is a power fantasy. It's the idea that if you train hard and you work hard, you keep working harder and harder and harder, you'll eventually become the thing you want to be the most in the world. And that's a great thing. Power fantasies can motivate you to be better than what you are. That's fantastic. I have no issue with that. The problem is that when we have power fantasies outside of that very specific niche, we demean it. We look down on it. And it sucks because what we're doing is ultimately cheapening fiction. We're reducing it and saying it can't be this bigger thing that it is, and you can't write certain stories. And, listen, when it comes down to it, sometimes these bad writing things that you see, it's younger writers who are, throwing out their ideas and trying to grow from it. You can't grow unless you screw up first. You can't become a better writer until you've written a few not so great things, because what happens is you learn from it. You go, okay, this didn't work, this didn't work, this didn't work. And if you're maybe too young to get that criticism, okay, but as you get older, you look back on it, you go, oh, well, this didn't work, and I should have done this instead, and this character didn't quite fit the right tone and what I was trying to get. And you grow from it. You write better stuff. And it's important to have those mistakes. If you don't try, you'll never get better. And the problem is, even with back when I was a kid, the Mary Sue discourse would make writers not want to try. Now, personally, I didn't give a crap. I just did it anyway. And it worked out pretty well so far. I made my screw-ups, I made my mistakes early on, and went, okay, here's what I can learn from this, and I can get better as a result. And my advice to any young writer who is discouraged and worried about making a Mary Sue, just write it. What you'll write will probably be bad. It'll probably suck, but it'll be bad in the way that's good for you. Because if you get out your bad writing now, the next thing will be better. And you'll learn from your mistakes, and you'll build upon your mistakes, and you'll become stronger as a writer as you keep learning from your as long as you're open to criticism. That's important too. But learn, grow, develop. You'll write something stronger later on. Maybe something that also takes elements that worked from your Mary Sue's, and you can dismiss the parts that don't work. But you'll be better writer as a result, so that's important. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I don't have many organized thoughts about this, just a feeling, whatever.